And so yesterday we were talking about the TestNg framework. We have just started with it, and I had just told you the difference between JUnit and TestNg. Both of them are similar. The objective of both the test cases is same. Sorry, both the testing frameworks, the objectives are same. Only thing is the way you do is a little different, and the outputs, the kind of outputs you get, they are a little different. There's a difference between syntax sometimes, fine, but more or less they have the same set of features. Okay, why I prefer with TestNg framework is that because Grid you can run easily with TestNg. Firstly, secondly, it is more simple than obviously the JUnit framework. Okay, and it is actually it's got a good documentation as well on the net. If you want to look at the documentation, then you can go to this site. What do you say? You can go to this link and you will get a very good documentation out here. See that I also learned from this, to be very honest. I also learned from this documentation. And it is very good, and these guys, they have got really good, given good examples and all in the complete documentation. Fine. Now, what I'll do is I'll continue forward. Right. Now suppose this is a login test. This was the simple test for login test. Suppose in this test I need to write another test case, which I can do very easily, called as a public void do logout. So what will happen is that this function is responsible for logging out of the application. Fine. So if I write over here system.out.println, logging out. Basically, these functions will have the WebDriver code. And if you run this login test now, you'll actually see that in the output failures 1, total test runs 2. Why failures 1? Because this do login test is failing. The expected and the actual title do not match in the assertion. If you look at the results over here, then do login is failing. Fine, and logout is passing. But how can this be possible when I never logged in? Fine. How is the logout test passing? It should be that the logout test should be executed only if the login test has passed. Right? This is one of the basic questions. Right? Now another thing. Suppose I have, after logging in, I make another test case called as public void change password. Fine, and inside it I write system.out.println change password. Okay, if I run the login test, if I run it as a TestNg test, you will observe that this is the output which is printed. Unfortunately, what has happened is that the order in which I have written that do login first, change password and do logout, that order is not maintained. First change password got executed, then login test and then logout. If you look at the results, then the results would look like this. Now this is also not acceptable. You want that the tests should execute in a particular order if given in a single file. Right? You want that the login should be first, then change password and then logout. Right? Again, if the login fails, then both the other test cases should not execute because they are dependent on the login test. Fine. So to meet these criteria, what we do is that, okay, we have some dependencies in test cases which we introduce with the help of TestNg. Now don't think that if the order is, I have given the order from top to bottom, the script will also execute in that order. No, TestNg has got its own order on the basis of which it decides which test case it has to execute. Right? So what we do is that we write over here, this is login test file. Now change password test is dependent on login test. So what I do is I write it over here in brackets, depends on methods, and you give the array of methods it is dependent on. I will say it is dependent on do login. That means that until or unless the login test is not executed, don't execute it. And also, if the login test fails, then again don't execute this. Right? So this will only be executed after the login test has passed. And similarly, the logout function, you can say that it is dependent on do login as well as say change password. Both these functions. So you can make a test case dependent on other test cases like this. Now when you run it as a TestNg test and you observe the output, you will see that the login test fails because the assertion fails, and change password and do logout are skipped. Both are in yellow. Yellow means it has skipped. Right? Correspondingly, in the project you will also have the HTML reports generated. If you refresh your project and go to the test output folder, you will see index.html. If you open up this index.html, go to the properties of this file, copy the path, and you open it out here. You'll see that the do login function is failing and logout and change password is passing. Fine. Sorry, it is skipping. Now, suppose I make expected and actual title same. Now, in this case, the assertion will pass. The login test is going to pass. If you run this test, it will see that you'll observe that it actually gives you an output like this, that all the three tests have passed. So basically you can make the test cases dependent on each other with the help of this annotation. Right? Now let's move further. I'll make a new class. Say my registration test. Okay. Now in this I am making a function @test public void registration test. Okay, you import this. Right. Now if I run this registration test.java, right click on it, I run it as a TestNg test. You'll observe that it is passing. Fine, all good. Now if I want to skip this test case, that I don't want to run this test case, then instead of @test, I have an annotation called as @ignore. Sorry, this is in what do you say? This is in JUnit. I'm sorry, this is not the test. In TestNg, if you have to skip a test, you can simply write throw new skip exception and skipping the test because of XYZ reason. Okay, now many times what happens is that you have got test cases running in a batch. Fine, you have got multiple test cases running in a batch. So what you need is that you need that some of the test cases should execute and some of the test cases should be skipped, right? So what you basically do is that you write throw new skip exception in those test cases which you need to skip. And actually when practically we work, we skip it very dynamically. We keep the information in the Excel file that which test case has to be skipped and which test case has to be passed. And when we are batch running the test cases, according to that information in the Excel file that which test case has to be skipped or passed, we skip the test cases. If you run this now, you will get the output like this, that the skips are 1, and if you look at the output, this test case will be skipped. Okay. Now similarly, if I write this line in login test, I go back to the login test where I was coming from, and I write the skip line in do login over here. Okay. Then obviously if it is skipping on this line, the next lines will give you an error that you are skipping the test. Why are you unnecessarily writing these lines? So I'll comment these lines. So basically I am skipping a login test on this line. If I run the login test now, you will get the output right. The login test has been skipped and the change password and the logout test cases. These two test cases have also been skipped, right? Which is absolutely right, because if the login test is not executing, why should you execute the other two test cases? Okay, this is how you skip the test cases. Right? Now I'll talk about various annotations in TestNg. Okay, suppose I make a new class and I will just write over here the class name as TestNg annotations. Okay, and in this class I'll make the annotations. I'll make the annotations like this: @test and public void test application. Suppose this is my function. Fine. Now every test has some pre and post conditions. Right. For example, before starting the test, you want to initialize the WebDriver. After the test, you may want to end the WebDriver. For example, before starting the test, you want to connect to the database. After ending the test, like you want to disconnect from the database, whatever it is. So for that, we have the functions like these. For example, this function is testapp1, and I'll create another test function called testapp2. And in this I will write testapp1 executing, and in the second function testapp2 I'll write testapp2 executing. If I run this, it will run both of them. Right, it is running. Now if I want to do something before every test or something like that, then I have a separate annotation in TestNg called @before test. Fine. @before test annotation in TestNg, you will hold on, we'll come to know what it does. I'll name it public void before starting. You can give the function name You can give this name any name. It's not necessary to write before starting out here. You can write anything. And I'll import the before test function annotation. And similarly, there is an annotation called @after test. Public void after testing ends. Again, you can give any name to the function, right? And you have to import after test. And in before test, I will write system.out.println before executing test cases. And in after test, I will write after executing test cases. Now, the order in which these annotation functions are called, look, there is no main function. Because there is no main function, the order in which these annotation functions are called is predefined. It is predefined inside the TestNg. Okay, if you run this code, you will see an output like this. That is, before executing test cases, test 1 executed, test 2 executing, and after executing test cases. So the order in which these functions they are executed is like that the before test is executing first, then test methods, and then after test. Maybe in before test you can initialize the WebDriver, open the browser and all. In the test function you can do your testing, and in the after test function you can close the browser. So we'll be doing all of that. Fine, just hold on. First understand the TestNg framework. Okay, now once you have done that, like that you have opened, tested and closed and all everything, right? Now there are other annotations as well. I'll talk about that, right? But one more thing, it doesn't matter, like if I give after test, before test, the order never matters, or if I give it in the end of the file, it doesn't matter. There is a predefined order in which these annotations are called. The position of these annotations in the Java file is irrelevant. Okay, so you can keep them anywhere. Fine. Now there is another annotation called as @before method. Now I'll name it as public void before test. Execution. And there is one more annotation called @after method, called as public void after test execution. You import both of them. Fine. Now once you have imported all both of them, I'll write system.out.println before test execution and after test execution. If I run this, you will see the output like this. Before method and after method, they are executed before and after executing each and every test. The before test and after test are just once, okay, in the very beginning, in the end. But before method and after method are executed before and after executing every test. Fine. So like if you have a situation that suppose you want to skip a test case based on some parameter from the Excel file. right? So what you can do is you can check out the Excel file in the before method and you can check whether to skip this particular test or not, and correspondingly you can skip the test, right? Or you want to test both the test cases on different browsers, right? So in before method you can open the browser, then in test you can test it, and in after method you can close the browser. So before method will be executed every time before the every test case runs. So you can make the procedure of opening and closing the browser out here, right? So this is before method and after method annotation. There are many other annotations as well, but basically you will be using these. Right, there is a before class and also lot of them are there, okay, but basically you most of the times you will use these ones, fine. Now there is another annotation in TestNg. There is another annotation which helps you to parameterize the data, fine. For example, I have a test and I want to execute that test more than once with different sets of parameters, right? Suppose I have a test case, I keep this I create a class called bank.java, okay. In this I have a function called @test public void transfer money. Now I want to execute this test more than once, okay. I want to execute this test more than once with different sets of data. So for that we have an annotation called @data_provider, okay. With the help of this annotation you can execute the bank test more than once. The construct of the data provider annotation is like this: public object two-dimensional array get data. Now what is all this two-dimensional array and all everything, okay, and what is object out here? I'll talk about it, fine. Just hold on. For time being I am just writing return null so that it goes away. Now this data provider annotation tells you that I will return your two-dimensional object array. Now what is object class, what is object array? Let's talk about that first, fine. I'll make a new class in the project called rough, fine. Now in object array, suppose in Java I make a string array. I write over here string array equals to new string 5. What does this mean? Okay, what does this mean? This means that basically this array can hold 5 objects inside it. Okay, this array can hold 5 strings inside it rather. And similarly, if I make an array called integer array, I can hold 5 integers in it. I can write ARR, the first integer first equals to some string, but I cannot put an integer inside the string array. I cannot put an integer inside the string array, fine. Now in Java we have something known as object array, in which you can put multiple types of data type into a single array. In integer array I can only hold integers, I cannot hold strings. In string array I can only hold strings, fine. Now in object array what can we do? If I create an object array, single dimensional, not two dimensional. Right? Then in this object array I can store anything. I can write arr0 equals city name, then arr1 equals to say some number, arr2 equals to the boolean type true, arr3 equals to some decimal number. Fine. So in object array you can store different types of data. That is possible. Fine. So sometimes you might have a number in your test data, sometimes you might have a string in your test data, sometimes a decimal number. So it depends. You can actually have any kind of data, test data, and you can store the test data inside the object array. Okay, and when we work with Selenium, what we do is that we make an object array, but we make a two-dimensional object array. We make a two-dimensional object array like this. Two-dimensional object array will have number of rows. When we work with Selenium and TestNg rather, we have got a two-dimensional array with number of rows and number of columns. Okay, and every row and every column has an index 0, 1, 2, 3 and 0, 1, second, column, third and fourth. Right. Now in this whole thing, fine, you have the test data lying in this kind of array. Now what happens is that in one row you have the test data for one execution. That is, this test should execute 4 times because there are 4 rows. Number of times the test will execute is equal to number of times the rows in this two-dimensional array. And number of columns are equal to the number of parameters we have, like username, passwords, email and all, everything. Okay, so if the two-dimensional array has got 5 rows, then the test function will execute 5 times. I'll show you how we do it. Hold on, I will go back to my bank.java, right, and I'll make a two-dimensional object array over here called data. Okay, and in this data, suppose while transferring money, I need the account number, I need the IBAN number, I need the holder name. Fine, account holder name. I need these 3 parameters. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll make a two-dimensional object array with 4 rows and 3 columns. So out here actually this you specify like this. First you specify number of rows and then you specify number of columns. Number of rows are 4 and number of columns are 3. Fine, and number of rows represents that I want to execute this test function 4 times. There are 4 sets of data available with me. Number of columns 3 represent that I have got 3 test parameters, that is account number, IBAN number and account holder name. Fine, and then I start giving the object array values. I'll fill in the first row first, that is data 0, 0 equals to account number. Suppose this is the account number. Fine, then data 01 IBAN number. Suppose IBAN number is this. Fine, then data 02 account holder name, say holder 1. Okay, similarly you can give for the second and the third row as well. This is the second row, write some account number, folder 2. This is the third row. Some account number, some IBAN number, and holder 3. Okay. So I keep the data like this. And generally what we do is that we don't keep the data like this, we read the data from the Excel file. Okay. And I write over here return data. Fine. So this is my test function, this is the data provider. Data provider tells you that there are 4 rows, that means I need to execute the test 4 times. Okay, I did not give the 4th row. I'll give you the 4th row as well. This is the 4th row. Okay, so these are the 4 rows. This means that first test function should be called with this, second with this, then third with this, and fourth with this. Okay, now basically what I am going to do is that in my test function, firstly I have to tell this test function that you have to get this data from this function. Okay, there can be multiple test functions in the class. Okay, I want to tell a particular test function that your data provider is this one. So you write over here like this, that the data provider is equal to get data. That is, the data provider for this test is equal to get data. Now test1 function will know, right? So another important thing which most people miss out is that in this function you have to pass on 3 parameters. The parameters in this function should be equal to number of columns. That is, I need to write like this: int account number, comma, int IBAN number, comma, string folder name. So you have to pass on 3 parameters in the same order as we have defined over here, and that's it. Okay, that is all you have to do. Rest of the things TestNg will automatically understand. TestNg will go and see this class. It will see that fine, this is the test function, this is the data provider. It will go inside the data provider. It will see that fine, you have to execute the test 4 times and there are 3 input parameters. Then it will verify if number of parameters over here, that is 3, is equal to number of input parameters in the function transfer money or not, and automatically it will call this function 3 times. Okay, it will call this function 3 times, as many times as number of rows. If you execute this test, sorry, 4 times. If you execute this test, you see that test runs are 4, and if you look at the output, these are the 4 outputs which you are getting. The test first got executed with this set of data, then with this set of data, then with this set, and then with this set. Okay, so basically you have a test function and a data provider function. You can relate both of them, and everything is done. Everything is done by number of rows and number of columns. Now if suppose by mistake I give 1 parameter less over here, you will immediately get an error, failures 1. If you look at the output, See the error, the data provider is trying to pass 3 parameters, but the method test cases this takes 2. So make sure that number of parameters are equal, and again the data type. If this is an integer, this is supposed to be an integer. If I write string over here, second parameter is string, but out here in data, second parameter IBAN number is actually an integer. If you run this, again you will have a failure. Illegal argument exception, argument type mismatch. That means these are known as the test arguments. So you have to be very careful out here. So that's how you actually run the test more than once. Okay. Now again, this is fine, right? If anybody has got any doubts, please feel free to ask me about this. Okay, because we are going to use this a lot in the framework we build later on. Fine. Now what's the practical problem which you will face if you have ever worked on the real-time applications, the enterprise applications, and if you're not a fresher out here, then you would be knowing that sometimes in real-time applications you have got a lot of test data. There is a page and there are 50 fields on the page which I have to fill in. Right, username, password, email, city, date of birth, place of birth, then your high school details, your other details, your bank details, your credit details. So there are a lot of things you need to fill on a particular page. So if there are 50 fields, will you make 50 parameters over here? Will you make number of columns equals to 50 and give 50 parameters separated by a column? Now that's something which is not good, because if something changes in the application tomorrow, right? If something changes tomorrow, then you will have a tough time. Okay, so I will talk about this scenario, that how to handle that. Okay, we can handle that easily. Okay, we can reduce the risk being that if the number of parameters they are too large, then something can change, right? If suppose the client says fine, remove this particular parameter from the web page, it's easy to remove it from there, but your automation script will be affected like anything. You have to go into each and every test which is having that parameter, and you will have to delete the variable, change number of columns over here, delete this line as well if you are changing the number of columns or reducing the columns. So I will give you a solution for that. Fine, I'll give you in coming days. I need to explain you some other topics as well for giving you that solution. Fine. Now you have made all these tests, right? I can run an individual test by simply right clicking on it and saying run as TestNg test. Okay, suppose if I change the title out here, then login test will fail. What if I want to execute all the tests together except rough.java, which is actually not a test case, it's just something which I want to execute all these 4 test cases together in a batch, right? Till now I can execute them individually, right click, run as TestNg test. To do that, we take the help of a file known as, an XML file known as testng.xml. Okay, if I go here, yeah, this is the file. This is the testng.xml file with which you can actually run the test cases in batch. What I did was basically I copied this TestNg file from here from some other project, and I right clicked on this project and I simply selected paste. You can do that. You don't have to keep this file under the source folder. You have to keep it at the project level, not under the source folder. Okay, and in this TestNg.xml, you have got various things. For example, the first, it's an XML file, it's got tags. First is suite name, it's a configuration file. You can name the suite as Learning TestNg. Then you can specify your test cases individually in these test cases. For example, the first test case which I want to execute is login test case. You can give any name over here, right? And okay, you have to give the class name as the fully qualified class name. What do I mean by fully qualified class name? I mean that starting from the package name. All the test cases are under the package test cases. So we'll write over here test cases dot login test. And the second test is REG test, registration test. So second will be test cases, class name, class, the Java class corresponding to this is test cases dot REG test. So in this XML file, I mention all the test cases which I want to run, and similarly TestNg underscore annotations dot Java. This is the third test. So I will write it as learning annotations, right? And this is in the package test cases dot TestNg annotations. Fine. And the last test, make sure the capital spelling, wordings and all, everything is correct out here. Okay. The last test is bank. Fine. And this is under the package test cases dot bank. So I have kept all my test classes out here in this file. The tags are very important. Make sure that you close all of them. You don't forget to close, otherwise it will not run. And to run them in a batch, I kept them in a single file, and on testng.xml. Now I can right click on this file, so choose the option run as TestNg suite, and if you run it, you will observe that there are total test cases 10, failures 1. If you look at the results, you will get the detailed results, that is login, register, learning and bank. These got executed. Login test was failing in to do login because in login test the assertion failed. T1 and T2 they never matched. Fine. So the change password and do logout they got skipped. Similarly, register test got skipped. The message is skipping the test because of XYZ reason. Because in register test I have written throw new skip exception, and this is the reason which you write inside the skip exception. This comes up in the report. Rest two test cases are passing. Fine. The bank test case is getting executed 4 times. Okay. So this is how you work with TestNg. This is just a basic overview of TestNg. There are other features as well. There are parallel tasks, there are other annotations, there are parameters and all. So we will be looking on to them as we proceed. So what I'll do is I'll actually stop here because people might be having